a pretty big one. We're going to talk about the biggest investment into national security and border funding that we have seen in our lifetime. We're going to talk about the national security and border funding in the One Big Beautiful Bill. You are going to see a lot of things on this screen. There are 10 things. You're going to see $45 billion to expand detention centers to allow for up to 100,000 detainees in one location. $46.5 billion for the border wall, $4.1 billion for ICE and BP, or Border Patrol recruitment. So this is signing bonuses and raises and bonuses. So all of those things for our current ICE and BP recruitment. $2.8 billion for border security tech, $500 million for AI cybersecurity. We're going to look at $40 billion for new military equipment. That's not just uniforms, but new planes, new weaponry, you name it, new drones. $24.7 billion for the Golden Dome. Do you want to tell them what the Golden Dome is?
I'll tell them about Israel's. Israel is a small country, and it feels like it's pretty threatened on all sides. So it has like anti-aircraft guns
Yep.
that kind of defend the whole country. So if missiles come at it, it can defend itself. However, I think we can both agree that the United States is a lot larger than Israel. So go ahead, take it away. Golden Dome.
I just kind of think of Austin Powers. Is that wrong? And I just think of, if you come to me, I shoot you down.
Yeah. Maybe like a big bowl.
Yeah, it's like a big mixing bowl that they are going to throw on top of the United States to protect us, to ensure that no one can touch us.
And it's not estimated to cost 24.7 billion. It's actually estimated to cost something like 175 billion. And even that has a caveat of it's probably not going to work because we're super big.
Yeah, we are doing this despite evidence saying that maybe we shouldn't invest this much money until we've researched it first. The good news is there are $12 billion for VA upgrades, which is phenomenal because, as we touched on earlier with veterans, our veterans deserve respect and our care. And this will go to upgrading VAs and hiring new people. And these are all really good things. There's 5% military salary increases. There's $250 million for AI Cyber Command. I want to point out in the middle, it's $75+ billion for border ICE increases and $150 billion for defense.